In 1773, a group of men crept onto 3 ships in the dead of night and threw a fortune into the sea. Not gold, not weapons, tea. A leaf that started as a quiet drink in a Chinese garden ended up lighting the fuse of a revolution. This is how a cup of tea broke an empire. Long before it crossed any ocean, tea was already ancient. In China, people had been drinking it for thousands of years, first as medicine, then as something closer to ritual. By the 8th century, tea had its own scripture. A scholar named Lu Yu wrote, the classic of tea, rules for growing it, brewing it, even for the silence you were supposed to keep while drinking it. Tea wasn't just a beverage. It was etiquette, poetry, power, poured into a cup. Tea didn't stay in China. Buddhist monks carried it to Japan, where it became its own art form. Then, in 1610, a Dutch ship picked up chests of tea in Macau and carried them home, Europe's first real taste of it. By 1658, tea was being sold in a London coffee house, advertised simply as China drink. Within decades, European ships were sailing straight for Canton to get it themselves. A quiet leaf had become a global obsession. Nowhere fell harder than Britain. Tea was fashionable. It was easy to sweeten, easy to share, easy to build a whole afternoon around. It moved from elite drawing rooms into ordinary homes, ordinary lives. Some historians argue it even reshaped how Britain worked and lived day to day, though that debate isn't fully settled. What isn't up for debate is this. Within a few generations, tea stopped being a luxury. It became a habit, a national identity, steeped in a cup. And where there's a habit that big, there's money to be made, and taxed. That money ran through one company, the East India Company. It started as a trading business. It grew into something closer to a private empire, with its own ships, its own armies, and enormous influence over the British government itself. The company bought, shipped, and sold most of the tea Britain drank. But by the 1770s, it was in trouble. Wars had drained its finances. Warehouses in London sat stuffed with unsold tea, and cheaper, smuggled tea, a lot of it moving through Dutch trading channels, was flooding into the American colonies, undercutting the company's legal trade. A corporation that powerful wasn't allowed to simply fail, so Parliament stepped in to save it. In May 1773, Parliament passed the Tea Act. On the surface, it looked generous, a way to let the East India Company sell tea directly to the colonies, cutting out the middlemen, making legal tea cheaper than smuggled tea. But look closer, and the trick reveals itself. The tax on tea wasn't removed. It was kept quietly, deliberately. Parliament wasn't just selling tea, it was proving a point, that it had the right to tax the colonies, whether the colonies agreed to it or not. Colonists weren't fooled. To them, a cheaper cup of tea was still a trap. On November 28, 1773, the ship Dartmouth sailed into Boston Harbor, loaded with East India Company tea. Colonial leaders demanded it be sent back to Britain unopened. But Massachusetts Governor Thomas Hutchinson refused. He would not let the ships leave, not unloaded, and not without paying the tax. 2 more ships joined the Dartmouth at the dock, the Eleanor and the Beaver. 3 ships, 1 deadline, and no way out. On the night of December the 16th, 1773, a crowd gathered at Griffin's Wharf. Some of them had disguised themselves, roughly, symbolically, as Mohawk warriors, hiding their identities before what came next. They boarded the 3 ships, not to steal, not to riot, to destroy. Chest by chest, they broke open the tea and dumped it into the harbor, 340 chests in all, tons of tea, dissolving into the cold December water. They were careful, almost disciplined. The ships themselves weren't damaged. This wasn't chaos. It was a message delivered with precision. By morning, the harbor was stained brown with tea leaves, and the American Revolution had its spark. Britain did not take the message quietly. Parliament answered with the Coercive Acts, a set of punishing laws aimed straight at Massachusetts. The Boston Port Act shut the harbor down completely, choking off the city's trade until the tea was paid for. It was meant to isolate Boston. Instead, it did the opposite. Colonies that had never fully agreed with each other suddenly found common cause, against a parliament that seemed willing to punish an entire city over a cup of tea. In September 1774, colonial leaders met for the first time as one body, the First Continental Congress. By April 1775, words had turned into gunfire at Lexington and Concord. And on July 4th, 1776, the colonies declared what had once been unthinkable: independence. Among their grievances against the crown, taxation without consent, and the strangling of colonial trade. The same fight that had started at a harbor full of tea. All of it, the war, the Declaration, the birth of a nation, traced back to a harbor full of tea. It's easy to forget that empires can turn on small things. A leaf, a tax, a cup of tea refused. The next time you watch tea leaves settle at the bottom of a cup, remember history has settled there before. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.